you love my barely prepared content here, then you'll love my completely unprepared content on my streaming channel, which is youtube.com/grimstreams, which is pretty easy to remember. Hello lovelies, I'm very old, and let me take you back to the origin of Warhammer 40,000. Well, not quite the origin, but the official origin of Warhammer 40,000. It came out in 1987, and in the spring of 1988, I think January, this being pre-internet really, the UK didn't have Black Friday back then. That's a recent American import. So instead, you would go out in January to the January sales, the post-Christmas sales. And on one such trip, we went down to Southampton, went to the Games Workshop there, and I may have bought Cyberpunk 2013 on the same trip, not sure. But I did pick up the brand spanking new blue cover Warhammer 40,000 hardback book. Now, Games Workshops back in those days used to sell all kinds of role-playing games, and they would sell miniatures as well, and you could get 2 to 3 miniatures for £2.50 back then in metal. You could get 100 skeletons for 10 quid. You know, jumpers for goalposts, all that shit. But yeah, I think I mistook it for a role-playing game, and picked it up. Taking it back, it wasn't quite that, but it wasn't quite the war game that we know today. Anyway, I liked it, I loved it, in no small part because it largely derived in many of its ideas from 2000 AD, a comic which I have been reading since I was 3 years old. Yeah, so it kind of appealed. I wasn't really into wargaming at the time. Warhammer Fantasy Battle was the thing back then. Warhammer 40,000 hadn't dominated everything, but here was a skirmish level, piecemeal. You could kind of make up your own rules for your own miniatures using what was available in the book, that sort of thing. It was an easy skirmish level, relatively affordable, believe it or not, introduction to wargaming, in a way that Warhammer Fantasy Battle wasn't necessarily, because people were pitching bigger armies in that. But it was very similar in many ways. So it was familiar, but it had role-playing elements. There was narrative to it, but it was a war game. But it was a skirmish level war game. Ever since then, Games Workshop, Warhammer, seem to have been going out of their way to alienate people like me from their customer base. Apart from their little side games like Necromunda, Mordheim, things like that, which are still affordable, skirmish level, interesting, more narrative focused sorts of games. But recently, they seem to have been going back to one degree or another to the way things used to be done. And I approve. So I've been watching Warhammer 40,000 in 40 minutes on YouTube, which is a fine show if you want to watch that. And a friend of mine has got heavily into all things Warhammer again recently. Unmarried, no kids, lots of disposable income. And we played a couple of games at Kill Team, which I'd been umming and ahhing about because, well, if you know Games Workshop's history, their side games don't tend to stick around for long. Even the really interesting ones, like Man of War, for example, or Battlefleet Gothic, they quickly get relegated, and then maybe they'll come back a few more years down the line with a new edition, which will then go woefully unsupported in a similar way all over again. But Kill Team, and to a lesser extent the more recent edition of Warhammer 40,000, really do feel like a throwback to those days, 1988, when I was sat on the floor of the living room poring over the book while Dad played his new Sade CD on the CD player. So Kill Team is strictly skirmish level, maybe 10, maybe 20 models per side maximum. It's not particularly customizable. because I think they've tried to make the teams very balanced. But there are more narrative elements to play, like models can become more experienced if you play a chain of narrative scenarios, and so on. And it does feel like a much more affordable gateway drug back into Warhammer 40,000, and it has a lot more of that focus on the individual model and their actions and their weapons and their special capabilities, which is a newer thing. So in many ways it is a throwback to everything that made original Warhammer 40,000 really fun and interesting and good, and even manages to improve on that slightly by giving different troop types personality through special capabilities or the availability of special orders, that sort of thing. So having played a few games with my friend, I took the plunge and decided to reinvest in Warhammer 40,000. God knows when I'll have time to put miniatures together or paint them. I'll probably put together a Tau squad and a Drakiri squad, and then we'll see how things go. Whether he trounces me constantly, or whether he was trying to lure me back into being into the game. So it plays in a way that is quite familiar to old school players, I would say. If they just bring back squats, I'd be super happy. Except that it's that, but even more so. So the original Warhammer 40,000, you had baseline figures, champions, minor heroes, and major heroes, and you wouldn't get additional wounds until you were a minor or a major hero. I think it was 2 or 3 wounds that you could take. These are much more like skirmishy role-playing characters. Maybe the Iron Kingdoms RPG would be another sort of comparative baseline, in that every character has multiple hit points, and multiple saves, and you roll multiple dice for damage as well. So it's much more granular, and heroes really feel like heroes. The individual models really feel like individual models. They have their own skills and so on, and you're engaging with each individual figure as you perform its actions, moving, attacking, whatever. It's a little bit fiddly in that there are a whole bunch of tokens that you can place in your characters, but as you go through the scenario, you really are making minute to minute, figure to figure decisions about what you're doing, what you're choosing to do, and so on. So it does have that oldhammer feel in a lot of ways, but even more so. And while it's not as open and as adaptable as the old Warhammer 40,000 original edition was, it's, if you're like me and you like fiddling with game systems and tinkering about with things, then it's not going to take much effort for you to open this out and maybe use it for other miniatures that you happen to have, because this is a very solid rule set for narrative oriented skirmish type play. I do find all the little tokens a little bit fiddly and annoying, and the fact that your characters can take multiple amounts of damage means that you often have to have a dice next to them or something to track how many wounds they've taken. It's all a little bit fiddly, but when you're only talking about 10 to 20 figures per side for a conflict, that really doesn't get that fiddly. And 10 to 20 figures is a lot more affordable than the size of army that you might otherwise expect. Now, the starter sets are quite expensive, but you do get a lot for that. You do get terrain, you do get a map, you do get 2 full squads of figures. What you don't get is the full rulebook, which is this. And what you don't get are the statistics for all the different kill team squads that are available. For that, you have to get a compendium, but that's already kind of out of date. as they're updating a whole bunch of stuff. So Games Workshop, they're gonna Games Workshop. They're gonna nickel and dime you to death. They're going to tinker with things and make you buy new editions more often than you probably should. That's just, that's who they are. But if you're thinking of dipping your toe back into Warhammer, or if you have a great deal of nostalgia for the older version of Warhammer, like I do, then Kill Team, I think, is an excellent stepping on point, and it's really not that expensive. I mean, you could buy the core book separately. You don't need all the chits and everything. You can just use a tape measure. Core book and models and the compendium won't set you back that much compared to what it would cost to get into 140,000 properly from scratch, shall we say. Of course, this is coming from me, who remembers the old days when everything was much more affordable. But yeah, so I've dipped my toe back in. I have enjoyed Kill Team. My friend actually let me win one match against him. Whether that was a ploy to get me into the game, I don't know. We'll find out. But overall, if you're into the older original edition of Warhammer, and you harbour as much resentment towards Games Workshop as I do since 1990, then this is a good sort of dip your toe in, get back into it. In terms of style, I can't help but compare to the older books and so on, and this isn't really up to par in terms of style, but Warhammer is such an inherently stylish game that I think I still have to give it a 4 out of 5. In terms of substance, I mean, you can get the lore online. You don't need all the lore in the book. This core book, the starter set, it's all a bit scant, but you don't need it so much anymore. Even so, I think I could only give it really a 3 for substance. It doesn't grab you by the balls and force you to pay attention to it in the same way that the old original book did, which is, I can't help but compare to that, because this is pitched very much at that same sort of level. So that's 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5, but you have to contextualize that. And I enjoy playing it. I have so far, at least, anyway. It's more affordable. It throws back to the narrative style of play. If that's what you're into, then yeah, this is a perfect way to get back into the hobby. Sang. Postmortem Studios, role-playing games, and a lot more to die for. Post-mort.com